Imagine being married to a man who is intelligent, well-educated, and charismatic. You share 6 children, a comfortable life, a home in a quiet Aurora, Colorado suburb, and a thriving family dental practice that sustains your lifestyle. Now, imagine that after days of feeling unwell, the only thing you see as your consciousness fades in a hospital bed is his face. He's there holding your hand, looking concerned, or so it seems. But behind that worried gaze, what he's truly holding is the secret of your death. Angela Craig was 43 years old and had been married to James Toliver Craig for over 2 decades. They met as teenagers, both deeply involved in the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. Their relationship followed the expected pattern within Mormon culture: early marriage, a large family, and a life centered around their religious community. They lived in a suburban home in Aurora, Colorado. James owned and operated a dental clinic called Summerbrook Dental, a typical, well-presented practice with a polished website, glowing online reviews, and an active social media presence. He was the public face of the business. Angela, though not formally employed at the clinic, participated in events and maintained close relationships with the staff. To outsiders, they seemed like the model family, functional, stable, even exemplary. But beneath that seemingly perfect exterior, cracks had begun to form, hidden from public view. James Craig, 45, had a known history of infidelity, according to people close to the couple. Angela had forgiven him more than once. She held on to hope that their marriage could be salvaged. With 6 children and a reputation to uphold within their religious circle, drastic decisions were not easily made. Some who knew James described him as charming and affable in public, but cold, controlling, and narcissistic in private. Angela, on the other hand, was known for her kindness, her quiet strength, and her reluctance to speak ill of her husband even when things were clearly amiss. Their social media profiles continued to show smiling family photos, posts celebrating birthdays and holidays. There was no visible indication of what was to come. In March 2023, Angela began to feel unwell: headaches, dizziness, fatigue. At first, it seemed like a viral infection, but her condition worsened rapidly. James took her to the hospital multiple times, appearing concerned, speaking with doctors, insisting he had no idea what was happening. At one point, he told physicians that Angela had a history of depression, and even claimed she had been self-medicating. These details would take on a much darker significance later. What no one yet knew was that James Craig had been secretly poisoning his wife in small, calculated doses, methodically, silently, while still kissing her on the forehead and pretending he wanted to save her. But before we reach that chilling climax, we need to go back to where it all began, because the poison wasn't the first sign. The first was a slow, almost invisible decline in her health. What seemed like a viral illness suddenly became a chronic condition overnight. And while Angela struggled to remain upright, her husband sat in his dental office with a computer open, Googling, "How long does cyanide take to work?" It wasn't the first time he had searched for it. On March 6, 2023, Angela Craig was admitted to the hospital for the first time with a baffling set of symptoms: severe nausea, dizziness, blurred vision, disorientation, and profound weakness. She could barely stand. The medical team admitted her, ran a battery of tests, and began treatment for what they suspected might be a viral infection or a serious gastrointestinal disorder. After a few days, her condition improved slightly and she was discharged. But almost immediately upon returning home, she relapsed. James remained constantly by her side, transporting her to and from the hospital, staying in touch with the medical staff and speaking to doctors in a tone that was almost clinical, as though he fully understood their terminology and processes. He raised no suspicions. On the surface, he was a devoted, cooperative spouse, always the first to relay Angela's medical history and suggest potential diagnoses. But what the doctors didn't realize was that his apparent concern wasn't rooted in care, it was surveillance. James needed to know exactly what they were finding, if anything. On March 9, just 3 days after her initial hospitalization, Angela returned to the emergency room with similar but more severe symptoms. This time, her speech was slurred, and she exhibited signs of cognitive confusion, yet blood tests still failed to provide a clear explanation. There were no signs of acute infection or major organ failure. The results were vague, but the symptoms were alarmingly real. Unbeknownst to her physicians, Angela already had traces of arsenic in her system. According to later investigations, James had laced her protein shakes and beverages with poison, drinks he personally brought to her during visits to the dental clinic. Despite her deteriorating health, Angela persisted in fulfilling her roles as mother and wife. She continued attending church, participating in her children's activities, and even assisting James with administrative tasks. Each time she visited his office, he would offer her something to drink. But it wasn't just arsenic. James had also ordered potassium cyanide online. He did so using a fake email account under the alias Jeremy Grayson. The package was shipped directly to his dental practice. He used a credit card registered in his own name and listed his actual phone number as the contact. The order was placed through FedEx with priority delivery. As would later be revealed, the purchase was made on March 4th, just 2 days before Angela's first hospitalization. From Angela's first hospitalization, the pattern was unmistakable. James poisoned her. She weakened. He appeared to care for her, and just as she began to recover, he repeated the cycle. He knew precisely how long it would take for symptoms to manifest and how to control the dosage to avoid killing her too quickly. His goal was to create the illusion of a prolonged, mysterious illness, something no one could clearly diagnose. But James wasn't acting purely on impulse. While his wife lay hospitalized, he maintained ongoing email correspondence with another woman, specifically an orthodontist from Texas with whom he had been romantically involved for several months. In one message, he wrote that he was waiting for certain family matters to resolve, and that soon nothing would stand in the way of their being together. Meanwhile, Angela could barely remain conscious. In text messages to her husband, she confessed that she didn't understand what was happening to her. She feared for her health, describing the sensation of her body gradually shutting down. James responded with calm, reassuring messages. He blamed stress. He urged her to trust the doctors, promising that everything would be fine. All the while, he continued his online research. What does cyanide do to the human body? Can arsenic be detected in blood? Symptoms of poisoning from common household products. Medications that mimic autoimmune diseases. On March 15th, just as it seemed Angela was experiencing a slight recovery, she was rushed to the hospital once more. This time, she was unable to walk, suffered from persistent vomiting, irregular heart rhythms, and dangerously low blood pressure. The medical team recognized the severity of her condition and admitted her to intensive care. That moment marked a turning point. Someone on the hospital staff noticed an inconsistency in her clinical presentation. The symptoms didn't align with any known illness. Lab tests showed no signs of infection, no bacteria, viruses, or typical toxins. It was then that one of the attending physicians alerted hospital authorities with a chilling suspicion. Angela Craig might be the victim of poisoning. As Angela slipped into a coma, investigators were already combing through her husband's purchase history. What they found was damning, so blatant, so undeniable, that authorities launched immediate surveillance. Angela Craig died just a few days later, but her death did not mark the end of the case. It was the beginning of the unraveling of a carefully constructed facade James had upheld for years. Angela Craig passed away on March 19, 2023, after more than 2 weeks of battling what had initially appeared to be an inexplicable illness. As family and friends mourned her sudden loss, the truth emerged far more swiftly than James Craig had anticipated. The initial cause of death was listed as multi-organ failure resulting from dehydration and shock. But something didn't add up. The rapid succession of severe symptoms, the conflicting medical records, and James's unsettling behavior triggered deeper scrutiny. The forensic pathologists were immediately struck by what they found. Angela's blood and urine samples were reanalyzed, and this time, toxicologists detected elevated levels of arsenic and cyanide in her system. These poisons had been present in her body for weeks. Arsenic, a deadly toxin even in small but sustained doses, accumulates in the system in a way that is not always easy to detect early. Cyanide, on the other hand, acts far more rapidly, targeting the cardiovascular and respiratory systems. Together, the two formed a lethal combination. The lab results confirmed what physicians had already begun to suspect. Angela Craig had been deliberately poisoned. Investigators began to reconstruct the timeline using hospital records and interviews with the doctors and nurses who had treated Angela during her repeated hospitalizations. As the investigation deepened, critical connections emerged, and suspicions of homicide grew stronger. James Craig's role in the unfolding tragedy was soon placed under intense scrutiny. Although he had always presented himself as a concerned and supportive husband, his behavior increasingly raised red flags. In earlier interviews, he made odd remarks about hoping everything would turn out well for Angela. But his words didn't match his actions. No one had realized that while he appeared attentive and engaged, he was simultaneously working to conceal his crimes. A turning point in the investigation came when authorities seized James's personal computer. On it, they found extensive search histories related to poisoning. Queries like how much cyanide is lethal, how to poison someone without being caught, and undetectable toxins. He had not only searched for information, but had also placed online orders for cyanide and on at least 2 occasions in the preceding months had purchased arsenic. These toxic substances were shipped directly to his dental clinic. Entirely unbeknownst to Angela or those around them, James had orchestrated his actions with chilling precision. He understood exactly which steps to take and how to remain under the radar. Investigators also uncovered continuous communication between James and a woman in Texas, with whom he was engaged in an extramarital relationship. During the entire period of Angela's illness, James was in regular contact with her, sending messages that described the difficult situation at home and his hope that things would be resolved soon so they could be together. What shocked authorities most was James's demeanor during questioning. When asked about his relationship with Angela and the nature of her symptoms, he remained unnervingly calm, almost detached. He showed none of the anguish one might expect from a man who had just lost his wife. Even when confronted with the toxicology findings, arsenic and cyanide in Angela's body, he displayed no visible shock or concern. Instead, he grew evasive, and when questioned about his potential involvement in Angela's death, James Craig gave cautious, often contradictory answers. But with this new information, the case took a definitive turn. Prosecutors in Colorado concluded that there was sufficient evidence to warrant an arrest. James Craig was taken into custody on March 21, 2023, less than 48 hours after Angela's death. What surprised investigators most was that his arrest did not come as a shock to many in his immediate community. While Angela's death devastated friends and neighbors, some had already harbored suspicions that something was deeply wrong within the Craig household. Doubts had accumulated over months, if not years, due to James's emotionally distant and manipulative behavior. People had sensed that something was amiss, but they had been unable to articulate it in time. Evidence against James continued to mount. Forensic reports, toxicology analyses, purchase records retrieved from his computer, and the incriminating communications with his mistress all confirmed what was now undeniable. Angela's death had been carefully and coldly premeditated. But James Craig was not merely a man seeking to rid himself of his wife. He was chasing an entirely different life. One he had long fantasized about, with another woman, free of the responsibilities and complications that came with his family. Musical note: James Craig's arrest on March 21, 2023 marked the formal beginning of the criminal case, aimed at convicting him of the premeditated murder of his wife, Angela. What had first appeared to be a tragic and baffling medical case was quickly revealed to be a meticulously orchestrated homicide, exposed by forensic analysis, digital tracking, and the missteps of a killer who ultimately failed to cover his tracks. Following his arrest, authorities in Aurora, Colorado charged him with first-degree murder. The prosecution's case was not built on a single, decisive piece of evidence, but rather on a painstakingly assembled mosaic of details that together painted a clear picture of guilt. It became evident that James had been planning Angela's death for weeks, all while maintaining a double life with a woman in another state. One of the most damning pieces of evidence was James's purchase history. He had used an alternate email account to order sodium cyanide online through a chemical supplier. To complete the transaction, he posed as a licensed professional, claiming to need the substance for laboratory use. The cyanide was discreetly shipped directly to his dental clinic, and it wasn't his first time. Authorities uncovered prior orders of arsenic and oleandrin, a toxic compound derived from the oleander plant, further underscoring the methodical and premeditated nature of his actions. Toxic substances followed a consistent pattern of acquisition. During a search of James Craig's dental office, investigators discovered packaging remnants from the cyanide he had ordered, along with chemical residues that matched the toxins found in Angela's body. But that wasn't all. They also uncovered a handwritten note listing symptoms consistent with arsenic poisoning. That list was found on his desk, as though he had been using it as a reference guide. Craig's digital footprint proved just as revealing. His web browser contained a series of alarming searches. How long does arsenic take to work? Symptoms of slow poisoning, how to cause death without visible signs, cyanide in food, side effects. But even with all this evidence in hand, there was something even more damning: his communication with his mistress. Her name was Curry Richens, a colleague in the dental field with whom James had maintained ongoing contact for several months. Forensic investigators recovered messages between the two. In them, James described his deep dissatisfaction with his home life, his desire to escape what he called an untenable family situation, and his belief that he would soon be free. In one particularly chilling message, sent just hours after Angela was hospitalized for the final time, he wrote, "This won't last much longer. Soon I'll be able to start over, without burdens." When questioned by authorities, Curry admitted to the relationship but claimed she had no idea James was poisoning his wife. She stated that he had told her Angela had been gravely ill for a long time and was unlikely to survive. He had also promised that they would move in together as soon as certain family matters were resolved. During this period, Angela's 6 children were placed in the care of close relatives. Child welfare services interviewed the children, who confirmed that their mother had been feeling ill for some time. Their father, they said, had insisted it was just a virus. It was also revealed that one of the older children had overheard James whispering on the phone about medications and dosages, though at the time he hadn't thought much of it. The case also sent shockwaves through the medical community. James Craig wasn't just a dentist, he had a spotless professional reputation. His colleagues found it difficult to reconcile the polite, well-respected man who greeted them warmly at conferences and participated in professional associations with someone capable of orchestrating such a calculated and monstrous crime. His clinic was shut down immediately, and his medical license was suspended without delay. Angela's body was exhumed once again to confirm the prolonged presence of toxic substances. The final forensic report revealed elevated levels of arsenic in her liver, kidneys, and hair, evidence of sustained exposure for at least 4 weeks. Additionally, the concentration of cyanide found in her stomach during her final hospitalization indicated that a lethal dose had been ingested shortly before she slipped into a coma. By this stage, the Colorado District Attorney's Office had amassed enough evidence to proceed to trial. The charges focused primarily on first-degree murder with premeditation, but also included tampering with evidence, spousal betrayal, and reckless endangerment of the children. As lethal substances had been brought into the family home, investigators declared the case one of the clearest examples of murder by poisoning in the state's recent history. There was no doubt as to who was responsible. Every piece of evidence pointed to the same individual, James Toliver Craig, dentist, father of 6, and the murderer of his own wife. Musical note: James Craig's preliminary hearing took place in early April 2023, just weeks after his arrest. The Arapahoe County District Attorney formally presented the charges, emphasizing the deliberate and premeditated nature of the crime. Supporting evidence included digital records, toxicology reports, and multiple witness testimonies. The case file had already exceeded 200 pages. The courtroom was packed, filled with family members, journalists, fellow medical professionals, and neighbors from Aurora. All watched the defendant closely. James appeared in handcuffs wearing an orange prison uniform. He looked visibly worn down. With his head bowed, he avoided eye contact with the public and remained unresponsive as the charges were read aloud. The prosecutor argued that the defendant had carried out a calculated plan over the course of several weeks, all while pretending to be a concerned, loving husband. This was not a tragic accident, nor was it a medical oversight. It was, in the prosecution's words, a carefully orchestrated murder committed by a man who wanted a new life, one without his wife or his responsibilities. During the hearing, the court read part of a text message retrieved from James's phone. Sent to his mistress the day before Angela collapsed, it read, "Everything is going to change soon. I just need you to hold on a few more days." That message, combined with his search history, the cyanide purchase, and the discovery of chemical residues in his office, formed what prosecutors called an overwhelming body of evidence. The defense, by contrast, took a more conservative approach. James's attorney argued that his client had been going through a personal crisis and had never intended to kill his wife. He claimed the toxic substances were purchased out of curiosity, allegedly for an experimental project that was never carried out. The defense denied that James had ever mixed cyanide into Angela's drinks and proposed that her death might have resulted from an undiagnosed heart condition or another underlying medical issue. The defense's claim that Angela had suffered an adverse reaction to her prescribed medications failed to convince those present. The toxicology report was definitive. There was no plausible cause of death other than direct cyanide poisoning. One of the most harrowing moments of the hearing came when a written statement from Angela's sister was read aloud. Through tears, she said, "Angela trusted James. She loved him. It never would have crossed her mind that the person sleeping beside her each night was slowly killing her. My nieces and nephews no longer have a mother, all because of the selfishness of a man who wanted to start over without facing the consequences." This testimony was accompanied by a sworn statement submitted privately to the judge by one of Angela's older children. In it, the young man described how his mother had seemed different in recent weeks, tired, confused, and increasingly afraid. "My dad kept saying it was just stress," he wrote. "But she was scared it was something more. Now I understand she was being poisoned." That same day, the prosecution presented a detailed timeline of events, highlighting key moments in the lead up to Angela's death. February 27, 2023, James places his first online order for arsenic. March 4, Angela experiences her first episode of severe nausea. March 6, James orders cyanide delivered to his dental clinic. March 13, Angela is hospitalized for the second time. March 15, James searches, "How long does cyanide take to work?" March 17, Angela falls into a coma. March 18, Angela dies. March 21, James Craig is arrested. The judge concluded there was more than sufficient probable cause to proceed to trial, and denied the possibility of bail, citing both flight risk and the gravity of the crime. Meanwhile, the Aurora community remained in shock. Angela and James's 6 children were placed in the care of maternal relatives. Neighbors organized candlelight vigils in her memory, remembering Angela as a devoted mother, a compassionate friend, and a pillar of her local church. At one such vigil, a close friend said, "Angela always spoke kindly of her husband. I never once heard her complain. That's what makes this so hard to accept. She died believing he was taking care of her." The case quickly attracted national media attention. Some outlets dubbed it the Colorado cyanide dentist. Others referred to it as the perfect crime that wasn't. It was a story made for headlines, an innocent victim, a large grieving family, a seemingly respectable professional hiding a chilling secret, and a clandestine affair serving as the motive for murder. James's attorney later announced his intent to request a psychiatric evaluation, claiming his client had been suffering a severe emotional breakdown and deserved compassion. But prosecutors and Angela's family rejected that narrative outright. As the case moved forward, one truth became undeniable to all involved. This had not been a tragic accident. It was a cold, calculated act of domestic homicide, executed without a weapon, without physical violence, but with a silent cruelty that shattered an entire family. After months of preparation, the trial of James Toliver Craig commenced in November 2023 at the Arapahoe County Court. The prosecution presented a thorough and compelling case, supported by chemical, digital, and testimonial evidence meticulously gathered since the beginning of the investigation. The defense made several attempts to dismiss the toxicology reports and digital communications, arguing that there was no definitive proof linking James directly to the administration of the poison. They also sought to undermine the credibility of James's mistress, Curry Richens, suggesting that she may have had a motive to incriminate him. However, recordings, messages, and financial records proved to be irrefutable. The documented purchases of cyanide and arsenic, as well as his possession of toxicology-related materials, placed James squarely at the center of the criminal plot. Throughout the proceedings, Angela's immediate family, particularly her children, testified about the visible deterioration in her health and the growing suspicions within the household. The medical examiner provided precise details from the autopsy, confirming prolonged and deliberate poisoning. Digital forensic experts outlined James's online search history and correspondence with his mistress, reinforcing the theory of a premeditated murder. On December 14, 2023, after less than 3 days of deliberation, the jury found James Toliver Craig guilty of first-degree murder with premeditation, along with several related charges. The judge imposed the maximum penalty, life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. He was also ordered to pay a significant fine and was permanently banned from practicing in any health-related profession. James is currently serving his sentence in a Colorado state prison. His professional license was officially revoked, and his assets were seized to cover legal expenses and restitution to Angela's family. Angela's 6 children were placed in the permanent custody of maternal relatives, who continue to support them both emotionally and legally. The local medical community and neighbors still remember the case as a chilling tragedy that exposed a hidden double life masked by the illusion of normalcy. Legally and socially, this case set an important precedent for future investigations involving poisonings within domestic or professional settings. It also raised awareness among authorities regarding the need for stricter oversight of toxic substances in clinics and private homes. If you enjoy true crime stories told in full detail, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and leave a like so we can continue bringing you more content like this. Let us know in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is. We love hearing from you and seeing how far these stories travel. Thank you for joining us.